background. Okay, so we have our streaming and recording started. So I want to welcome Ananda mayi, who is our sage for today, that will be doing our series of the beauty and the messiness of the Sadhaka's journey. I want to welcome the devotees who have come on Zoom. It's always lovely to have a few faces and a few names to connect with and know that you're here with us, and that gives us the support we need. And yeah, so we have been doing this series. I've lost track of how many we've done so far, but I should probably figure that out and tell everybody. And we're going to continue to be talking about the Sadhaka's journey and comparing it somewhat loosely to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And the reason that we're using this template is to really to show how the Sadhaka's journey is, whatever happens in our journey, the messiness of it is all for empowerment and growth. And it's all a necessary part of becoming the spiritual heroes that we're all meant to become. And so I'm going to start off reading Ananda mayi's short bio. I love it. I love when we have something very succinct. Ananda mayi is an initiated disciple of Swami Tripurari. She lived for 5 years as a monastic at Odarya and Madhuban ashrams, where she served as a pujari and a cook. She now lives in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains near the former Sagrahi ashram. She spends her time teaching poetry classes and caring for Swami Tripurari's Chota Gora Nitai deities. So welcome, and I'm really excited to do this interview. Ananda mayi and I have been friends for some years, and I know how deeply thoughtful she is, and I know that she's going to offer us a lot of depth and beauty in this interview. So no pressure.
Oh, it's okay. It's talking to an old friend, so
that's what we want it to be. It's like relaxed and not to be. So we'll start off and ask, the first question would be, what was it that called you away from the ordinary life and called you to your spiritual direction?
Yeah, in a single word, I would say that it was suffering. And I've been thinking a lot about this question in the last few days, kind of trying to get ready for this interview. And I want to say that it's not perhaps in the way that you might think about suffering being what might call someone to a spiritual life. It wasn't for me that I was trying to get away from suffering, or that I was even seeking the answer to the problem of suffering. Why do we suffer? It was more that the suffering itself really acted as a vehicle that opened the doors to a spiritual life. And I was thinking about, kind of how to explain this to someone. I think that maybe we all have experienced this in some way, but how to kind of, to talk about it. And a couple of images came to mind. The first is an image from alchemy. I don't know if everyone knows what alchemy is, but it's an old kind of magical art where elements are taken, and generally the idea is one thing that alchemists try to do is to make gold. And so I was thinking about how when we experience trauma, which is part of my story, I experienced trauma very early in life. I was sexually abused as a child, and I won't, talk about that too much here, but it's part of my story and an important part in this way. For me, and I think for a lot of people who experience trauma, it kind of breaks a person down into their elements. What we thought we knew about the world and about ourselves kind of comes apart, and we're left with kind of these raw elements. But what it also does is it creates this kind of alchemical vessel, if you will, where these elements can be put back together in a new way. And so we have this chance to kind of make gold, if you will. And that's really been my experience kind of time and again in my life, that these traumas that I've experienced have opened the doorways for this to happen. The other image I was thinking of is that in the forest, there are frequently fires. Now, of course, I know right now, this is something that's been unsettling in our world, but in general, it's a natural process that happens. There's a forest fire, and those ashes nurture the soil. They nourish the soil, and create the conditions for new growth. And I think this happens for all of us too. We experience traumas, they can be big or little, that kind of, again, break us down into our elements and create the conditions that we need for growth and for change. So like I said, this happened for me, very early in my life. And what I experienced was that as young as I can remember, this opened, it caused me to ask questions very young. As young as I can remember, I was asking questions about the nature of reality. I was engaged in prayer. I remember almost praying constantly as a child, and in a way that is sort of, well, it's interesting to me now to look back on, like, for example, I wasn't really praying to ask for things. It was like I'd hear a funny joke and I would offer that to God in my mind, or, because I wanted God to hear the joke too, or I'd see something very beautiful and I would, want to share that, in a prayer. So, it's interesting, even though I was going through things that were very difficult, it wasn't that I was praying to escape those things. It was that, the spiritual relationship itself that I was developing was kind of a balm, if you will, to help me through those things and to give me perspective. So anyway.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I love your two images there. And it reminds me of another image that Padmanabha Swami just shared recently in a class, I think in Bulgaria, about the art of pottery. And I guess it was in Japan, when a pottery breaks and then they put gold to put the pieces back together. And the more that something gets broken, the more it becomes gold. Pretty soon your whole piece of pottery is just gold. And so it really reminded me of that image also. And so these images are so positive, they're so affirming, that being broken down to our elements, as you say, is really it's life-giving, it's new growth, and it's all about, becoming the best version of ourselves. So that's very, very helpful. Thank you. So yeah, you kind of entered into that next question of, what things in your childhood really kind of gave you clues or hints about your direction. Now, I know that there was a period of time in your life where you went to college, you did things very much according to the script, and so what were some other things maybe that gave you the indication that you were not bound for that kind of ordinary existence?
Yeah. Well, I started talking, a little bit about that, as you said. But there were quite a number of things in my childhood that were kind of clues. And when I sort of reawakened to spiritual life in my kind of early 20s, I looked back on those clues, and it kind of everything made sense. So a couple things that came to mind were, I wanted to be a nun from the time I could remember. That was like, if you would have asked me as a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a nun. um, and, I think that came out of this kind of life full of prayer and worship that was really what I thought of as really my life, as a child, much more than the kind of external events that were going on. I also started writing spiritual poetry. Again, from the time I was like 4 or 5, I have these memories of sitting and writing these poems, and you know things that I don't think that a lot of children think about at that age. Like I remember sitting and writing one about how I was in a Christian family at the time, so that was my kind of frame of reference for all of this, about how the cross in Christianity was a quiet symbol of sacrifice. This was, I was 4 or 5 years old at this point. So, I kind of had this, spiritual inclination from the time I was really, really little. But the one memory that really stands out the most when I think about this is that, again, I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. I was sitting and just playing with a toy, as kids do at that age. And I several times in my life have had this kind of guiding voice, that will, give me some instructions about, where I'm to go in my spiritual life. And there have been several times in my life where that voice has been very powerful, where it's really left a mark. And this was one point. I was, again, I was 4 or 5 years old, and I just heard within myself that I would not be a Christian, but that I should study Christianity to learn about God, but that my path would come to me in time. And I remembered that through my whole childhood. And then, when I was in my early 20s and I met the devotees, that memory was really powerful for me, because everything started to make sense. In my teenage years, I really, again, I did really try to study Christianity. I studied the Bible, quite a lot. And I just could never quite commit to the path. And that really kind of bothered me. But I had this memory of, this kind of guiding voice, telling me, assuring me that, I would find my path, and that, this wasn't it, but, this would help me along the way. And so I'm really grateful for that. It's really, helped to make things clear for me. But, I think I understood at an early age that, that I was meant to be on a spiritual path in one way or another.
Oh, very, very clear.
Yeah, very clear.
Much more clear than I think most people get. And yeah, and I wonder, did you have much resistance when you decided to embark on this pathway? Did you feel that there were forces that were trying to hold you back, and what were they?
Sure. Yeah. Definitely I had resistance. I think that the main kind of struggle I had at the very beginning was, I think that we all have these kind of like biological senses in us, like we don't want to be separate from the group. As humans, we don't, we don't want to be outside of society, because there's a sense of not being safe in that, I think it's right in there with things like fear of death and things like that. It's a very powerful fear that really is kind of hardwired in us as humans. And this was really a surprise for me, that when I started to turn in this way, I encountered the devotees, and I started to think about taking up the practice. This fear was really strong for me. What will people think? Will my parents accept me? Will my partner accept me? I even remember, one of the first kind of, things, after I met the devotees, was I sat down with my partner and I said, well, what will you do if I'm chanting in the house? And um, he said, oh, I'm not sure, I don't know how that would be. And so he did have a sense, that this could really radically change, my whole support structure. And then, a little bit further along in the journey, which, we can backtrack here, I'm sure, but I eventually joined the ashram. I lived at Odaria, and in the first months there, I shaved my head. And this was, my Guru Maharaj had asked me to, and everyone else there shaved their heads. So, and I was so shocked after I had done that there was this kind of like visceral fear of, I was raised as a female, in a female body, in a patriarchal culture where, things like having, beautiful hair and having, wearing dresses and makeup and all of those things actually, can create a sense of safety for women. And I don't think that, again, I won't get too much into this, but it's unfortunate that it's that way. I wish that it weren't that way. And I didn't even realize that these kinds of perceptions were in me. And so to give that up, to give up this sense of belonging in this culture was really scary for me. And I think a lot of what we do in an ego-effacing spiritual path really does kind of put us so that we're swimming upstream. We're swimming against, there's all the other fish are swimming down this way, and we're swimming the opposite way, and so, we leave the safety of the group, and and it's also going to be a struggle. And so, yeah, it was quite hard at first to give those things up.
Yeah,
but,
so yeah, really wonderfully articulated. And I think even, my own feelings about what it just really echoed inside of me. Yeah, the feeling of the group, and the fear of not being, being in that safety of our group, and going outside of that. So what allowed you or helped you persevere, that you didn't turn around? Like a lot of people come. I mean, I lived in an ashram for many years, and I saw so many people come for a few weeks, a few months, and then that pull back into the society was just so intense that they couldn't ignore it.
Yeah. Really, it was the practice itself that allowed me to stay. I think one thing I did early on was I really intentionally just closed those doors. I really withdrew into myself, and I tried to be around the devotees. And I just looked at it as an experiment. Let's just see how this feels. Let's see what comes out of this. But I did really shut off other connections that I thought might influence me, because I really wanted to be able to hear my own voice. And so, and I did, I kind of quieted everything else down so that I could hear my own voice, and so that I could hear Krishna, or, however Krishna was speaking through me, whether that was through other devotees, or, some sort of internal guidance. I really tried to quiet everything, but in the end, it really is just that the practice itself maintains us. I mean, there's everything that we need is in our practice, and is in Krishna. So really, I mean, we talk about thinking about Krishna as our maintainer, as a part of surrender, as a part of Sharanagati, but it's simple in a way. Krishna is our maintainer, and the form that Krishna has come in is the Maha Mantra. It's our chanting, our kirtan, our deity worship, at this point in our, at least in my sadhana, and I found that to be more than enough. I mean, it's if any time I think there's something that's too much, as soon as I go back to that, I go back to chanting, I go back to a kirtan, or to the deity worship, I find like everything I need is there, to get beyond whatever obstacle it is. So yeah, I guess I as much as like looking back on it, there was a struggle, of course, like it was very much not easy. It's the answer to that was really always very simple. So it's kind of interesting,
Yeah. Well, that's like, in the hero's journey, they get special mantras and potions, and swords, and all kinds of things to be able to fight the obstacles. And for us, we get the Ma mantra, and we get sadhu sanga. That's those are our weapons. And that's what, if we take to them, then we have this amazing empowerment to push through what seems insurmountable. I mean, I really, at the beginning, I didn't know how I would fight against this current that you're talking about. Like, we're going upstream, they're going downstream, and it felt very much like a losing battle, and I was going to drown in this whole process. So I really appreciate that so much. Yeah, so why don't we turn to then what happens that when we come to the path and we actually make that commitment and say, okay, I'm here for better or for worse. I'm sticking to this path. This is, and that's kind of like our real initiation is when we make that heart commitment. And so that's when, yeah, we get tested and the struggles come in all kinds of different internally and externally. And that's the messiness of this journey. So I'd love to hear you talk about what some of your messiness has been.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's been considerable messiness. And as I said, at the beginning, though, and this isn't to say that there weren't dark times in all of this for me. There were certainly really difficult times when, I looked at, some of the struggles I was having, and I think the fear for me wasn't that wasn't that Krishna doesn't exist, or that that God doesn't exist or whatever. It was that um that Krishna is out there and he just doesn't care. He just doesn't care about me. Like, why am I struggling in this way? So there were dark moments where I wasn't able to see that connection. But I do want to say, looking back on it, with perspective, there's not a single one of those struggles that I'm not grateful for, because again, I really do see Krishna's wisdom in the end, that that we need these struggles, we need the tests, in order to come closer to Krishna, and in order to see ourselves, what we want. I mean, it's an exercise of our will, to practice bhakti. And I mean, it really is one of the most incredible things about being a human, is that we have this free will, and we can make the choice in the face of difficulties, or in the face of great happiness, in the world. Also, not easy when things seem to be going so well, to enter into spiritual life. And we can have a long conversation about which is better, which is more conducive for spiritual life. But it's not easy to choose, bhakti, but as we do, we are in difficult situations, and we choose bhakti again and again. That's strengthening that that will to choose, so that the next time something comes to us, that we choose that again, because we saw in the past, that when I chose to turn to bhakti in this situation, that the results were so overwhelmingly positive, that that's what I'll do again, and lifetime after lifetime. So we really do need the tests. But yeah, I think early on, when I was at the ashram, I was diagnosed with Addison's disease, which is an autoimmune disease. I was having lots of kind of like, strange health problems that, couldn't figure out. And they're still not figured out. So anybody who has these kinds of health issues might know, it's very hard to figure out what's going on and get a diagnosis. But anyway, my body wasn't cooperating, basically. This was, again, I mean, this is what I had wanted since I could remember. Since I was like 5 years old, I was sitting around dreaming about living as a monastic. And finally, I had found my path. Everything had become clear, and I was there. I was living in this, beautiful place. I was Gornitai's pujari, all day. I was cooking for the deities and worshiping the deities. And my body just started breaking down. And it was very frustrating and heartbreaking, and just, just very, very, very hard. And at the same time, I struggled really my whole life with anxiety and depression. And I'd had quite a number of spiritual experiences at that point, especially, after meeting the devotees and in this kind of interim between going to the ashram where I thought, oh, this is over, I'm not going to struggle with this anymore. And then I started struggling with it again. But one memory that's really powerful for me was the first time I was dealing with depression at the ashram. And I was laying in my bed. I was just anybody who's been through depression probably knows this feeling. You're like curled up, you feel like you just want to go nowhere but a black hole. It's a very dark feeling. And I was chanting the Maha Mantra, and simultaneously, while I was feeling this horrible feeling of depression, I felt this just intense joy and bliss from the mantra. And I remember just thinking, like, wow, like, I mean, this is what this is teaching me. This is what this depression is here to teach me in this lifetime, that I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, and that, my sadhana isn't dependent on a place, it's not dependent on a body, it's not dependent on a mind, that, I'm able to practice even while at the same time having this experience of depression, that it was separate, that my experience as a devotee, that my experience of myself was separate from this experience I was having in my body. And the same, I had the same experience with some of, the physical struggles I had, going through experiences of pain and neuropathy and things like that, I could have that experience, which was, unsettling. And also at the very same time have, experience of just total joy and bliss from a kirtan, or from chanting the mantra or worshiping the deities. So yeah, I mean, that's really what got me through it. And I mean, it's still a struggle for me, and it's possible it could be a struggle through this whole lifetime. I don't know, we still don't really have good answers, as to why people have depression or anxiety, or so it's possible. But I do know that it doesn't have to stand in the way of practicing bhakti.
That's really powerful. That's yeah, because so often I've seen and heard devotees actually stop their practices when they're really in either physical or emotional pain, and thinking that that's going to, somehow they're going to get through it easier if they are not trying to practice, but such a really powerful testimony to exactly the opposite of sticking to your practice and getting that transcendent experience. And yeah, that's you're very, very fortunate to have had that experience. And I can see why that's carried you through. Yeah. So any other I mean, mind and body challenges, I think, are there for all the devotees. And so that's the internal kind of challenges. What about were there external things that were challenging being a monk or a woman monk in the ashram?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think, I was thinking about this as well. I definitely struggled to fit in at the ashram. I think I've struggled to fit in pretty much everywhere in my life. I've been, a little bit different. And I was very different in a way in that context at Odaria, because I was the only person in a female body living there for some time. And it was hard for me. I think, in some ways, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that fear of being apart from the group. So you kind of think, okay, I'm leaving the group I've known, I'm leaving perhaps my family, my friends, maybe, depending on how, if someone's situation. But for me, that was the case to some extent. My family really, wasn't on board at first, and some of my closest friends really, fell away at this time. So I really was kind of looking to the monastic community to kind of fill that role, and then to feel kind of not accepted, fully in that community was really hard. And I understood in part, I couldn't quite be part of the group in the way that the men had formed a group, just because of what we're trying to do as monastics. Now, ideally, right, if we were all, totally, at the end of our spiritual journey, and didn't have any kind of bodily desires anymore or anything like that, we could all just live, very peacefully as one unit, and would no problems, but that's not the reality. We're sadhakas, we're still working through a lot of those bodily designations, and ego struggles and things like that. So it made sense that I wasn't really able to be kind of absorbed in the group in the way that I would have liked to. But it was really hard for me. And I really struggled with that. And, I think that, again, it was the practice that really got me through. And, what's interesting, again, there's always, it seems like to me, in all of these struggles, there really was a lesson, there really was something that I needed to learn. And for me, because I wasn't able to get out of the group what I wanted out of it, socially, which may or may not have been good for my practice, I was sort of forced to see people more spiritually, when I was feeling rejected, in some sense, in some, in some contexts, to look and see this person as a sadhaka, see them as a spiritual, uh, as a spiritual being. And I think that it helped me really to develop that sensibility, and to kind of, also not to try not to look at people in terms of, what do I need from them? Oh, I need this, social relationship to feel secure, to feel, to not be afraid in these ways. But how can I serve them, as a sadhaka? And so in some way it kind of forced me to think more in those ways. And this isn't to say, I mean, I had, wonderful relationships with people too at the ashram, and I'm grateful for the ways in which others extended themselves and things like that. So this isn't an overarching but but it was a struggle for me there. So.
Sure. I wonder, one thing that you had kind of started off with was how your trauma had played a big role in kind of bringing about the suffering that was actually something that helped you to find Krishna, or found God in that. So did that, because trauma is such a deeply, deeply rooted experience, did you find that it came up after like you had said, with the depression and the anxiety, you came and thought, well, that's all in the past now, I won't have to experience that. So I wonder if your experience of the trauma that you went through was also something that you thought would be flushed and you wouldn't have to deal with, and if not, how did that play out in your experience in the ashram? Or
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, well, I guess there's a couple things coming to mind. The first, I guess, to backtrack quite a bit, I guess, would be that so when I was in my early 20s and I was as you mentioned, I between my childhood and then my teenage years, I'd kind of gone through really a time I considered myself kind of agnostic for a while. Sometimes I would call myself an atheist, while I was still like praying and sneaking into churches and things like that. But I guess I went through a time where I was like very interested in philosophy. And it was very much, I was actually reading a lot about religion, but from really a philosophical perspective. So it was really, a lot of those kind of more mystical, so to speak, doors kind of closed for a while. And I was much more in my head. I was much more kind of in an intellectual, period in my life. And it was a trauma that kind of reopened those doors from my childhood. And I won't go into that too much, but there was a death in my family that was very much connected to the earlier trauma, and it really opened all of that back up again. And I became interested again in mysticism, in monasticism. I started reading everything I could get my hands on about both of those things, and about Eastern religions and things like that. And it was pretty soon after that I met the devotees. So again, it was these traumas time and again that kind of marked these significant shifts towards spiritual life in my journey. And that particular time in the processing of that trauma, I was thinking a lot about the purpose of my life. What am I supposed to be doing here? And the answer that kept coming to me very strongly was that that the primary purpose of life is to learn to love, and not in the sense of like family love or friendship, and this, although that can be part of it and that can be a practice, but kind of the essence of loving, that was the primary thing to explore. And it was really like right after that I met the devotees. And I had made a move in response to that kind of knowledge. I moved from New York to Chicago and ended up living like down the road from some devotees. So it all really felt very much like arranged, at that point. But then I guess fast forward a little bit, I had met the devotees, and I had a very powerful meditative experience. And it was while chanting the Maha Mantra. And it's that experience to me is this it's sacred. And I really, it's an experience that I don't talk about. I've talked about it with my Guru Maharaj, but because I think of it like a candle, it's like a little flame that's lit in me that I don't want to blow out with my ego, because I know if I talk about it that there's a possibility of it coming from a place of ego. And so I don't want to I don't want to talk too much about that here, but it was a powerful experience for me. And after that experience, one of the first kind of like waves that washed over me was the suffering is done, it's over. And I literally, I mean, the words that came over me were, it's finished, it's done. And I really felt that, and I experienced that for like months after that, just, I mean, really truly, I mean, the anxiety, the depression, the post-traumatic stress, they were gone, just completely. And I mean, anyone who has dealt with these things knows how what a weight that is, and what a challenge it is to try to get through these things on the physical, mental level, that to have all of that just go away after a meditative experience was just a very profound experience for me. And so I did think that it was over. And so I was quite surprised when it came back, when the depression and anxiety came back, and when experiences that I had after that maybe mimicked in some way the traumatic experiences. There was some element that was similar, and it brought it up, that I was struggling with that again at the ashram. And again, I mean, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, I suppose, but I mean, it really was just the practice that got me through. I guess I don't have much of an answer other than that. I was I mean, I had a lot of episodes of post-traumatic stress, when I was living at the ashram. And again, I mean, I had experiences where I was in the midst of that, which is, a very painful, difficult place to be. And also just, in total bliss, dressing the deities, or, cooking for Guru Maharaj, or, whatever it might be. And that those things could be happening at the same time. And again, it really brought home the lesson for me that, I'm not this body. Well, again, I don't, we have to try to take care of the body and the mind. I definitely, I feel kind of responsible to say that. I mean, I'm talking about all of these issues and talking about how, chanting has helped, has helped me to have perspective on them. I've also, had a lot of help. I've had a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of work on my own, and it's really important, if anyone is listening here, to take care of your body and take care of your mind, in on those levels too. You have to address those issues on that level as well. But the spiritual practice can give us perspective on those issues so that we understand that that's not who we are at the end of the day. That's not, that's not the essence of ourselves. The other thing it's really taught me, which has been a powerful lesson, is not to make assumptions about what's going on inside of any other person or any other practitioner. That they might seem to be and they might be very much struggling with whatever issue it is, physical, mental, environmental, whatever, and they might be having profound internal experiences at the same time. And so not to think, oh well, they're not practicing because they don't look joyful all the time or something like that. These are deep internal experiences. So it's helped me to see that the ways in which spiritual life plays out are really nuanced, and that these things can be really gifts from Krishna, that we're these obstacles can actually be good for us, and they can be intended for us, in some sense. So just not to judge, not to judge what anyone else is going through as well. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, really. And I'm so glad that you're reiterating that point over and over, because it's so critical and so foundational to our progress. If we're not able to see the world like it's all being, everything is really being orchestrated for our highest good, then it's going to be hard to stay on the path, and we will become discouraged. And if we don't really have that deep conviction of that, so thank you that you've been able to do that for many years and stick to your practices and stick to the path. And so I would like to ask you, just because I'm looking at time, what would you say are some of the most profound changes that you've seen in yourself?
Yeah. I think that the most profound change I've seen is really the ability to experience joy. And the perception. It's funny, I think we've kind of already gotten there in our in talking it through, but the perception that that reality itself is beautiful and good at the end of the day, and that it is beautiful, it is good, it's friendly, as we like to say, including suffering, including trauma, including, it's not good despite those things. It's good. It's good as a whole, and in everything that it is. And I think it's those experiences that I've had of experiencing, really dark moments alongside this sense of joy that's helped me to be able to see that clearly, that and it really has become to me like a river that just flows through everything, this sense of the joy of just existence, of reality, and ultimately, of course, of our existence in relation to Krishna, which is our existence really, is a constant, that it's again, I imagine it like a river that's just flowing through, all of these experiences that we have the ability to always go and sit beside, like that's always within us, and that no matter what is happening, we can walk down to that river and sit and hear it and see it, and know that ultimately is the truth. That's what's eternal, that's what's going to go on. All of the rest of it is circumstantial, and it's intended to help bring us to Krishna. But that's, it's that's going to change, those things are just our circumstances. So yeah, I think, that ability to experience that joy is really a profound change I've seen. And then connected to that is a sense of compassion. I think that joy and compassion really are directly related. And I think as one grows, the other grows as well. But that I can, from that vantage point, beyond empathy, like, a sense of really, a spiritual sense of connection with all other living beings, and a sense that other living beings also are more than their circumstances, and more than their bodies, more than their minds, and to be able to see others in that way also, and to see others as also on a path. And so, to be able to look, I guess, with curiosity at their journey, like, even if it doesn't make sense to me as some aspect of their life, or doesn't make sense to me, to just look and see, I wonder how that's functioning for them. I wonder how that's helping, to facilitate their growth, and just to be curious about that, rather than, kind of judgmental about, how somebody else's, life is manifesting at any one point. So but yeah, so yeah, sense of joy, and a sense of compassion, and just a sense that life is good. And it sounds like it's a simple thing, and it's a kind of cliched phrase, I guess, but from a spiritual standpoint, it's not cliched at all, to feel that life, that reality itself is good, is really quite profound,
It really is. It's again the foundational piece for the sadhaka. The more that we have that really, really in place, then we become fearless, because unless we have that understanding, there's going to be constantly fear of bad things happening, like, the sky is falling, or, but yeah, even if the sky is falling, literally, the sadhaka sees, oh, okay, it's Krishna's way of winding up this, this incarnation of my, and it's fine, because he's going to take me to some other adventure somewhere else, and it's going to be wonderful. So yeah, I think ultimately, not even being afraid of our, the body's ultimate destruction, which is going to happen, and embracing that's part of life. It's part of the journey, and all of us need to, really come to that and along the way. And it sounds like you're really on the way to embracing that reality and that ultimate aspect of the human experience.
Yeah, on the way. I mean, I want to say also, I mean, I'm still human, and I think it's important to talk about that too. I mean, when things happen that are scary or unsettling or traumatic or whatever, I mean, there's still that, those fears still come, it's just that, I have a practice that allows me to see over them now, and to see beyond them, and to put them in context of a larger whole. And so again, I mean, those things can be happening simultaneously. We can have those fears, we're still in human bodies and human minds, it's natural to have those fears, but to have a context to put them in that makes them actually useful to us, is very helpful, certainly.
So just one last question that I would like to ask. Now you did leave the ashram, and now you're living in the world, and you have a real job, and you have a house to take care of, and a lot of responsibilities that kind of might even look like an ordinary life, but it's far from ordinary. And maybe just talk a little bit about that transition and how that's fit into your progression as a sadhaka.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first of all, just want to say, the transition hasn't been easy, and I think that that's something we need to talk about as devotees, just in general, that moving from an ashram life to a householder life, I mean, it's a huge adjustment, and that's okay. That's again, we're only human. That's well, we're in human bodies, but it's been a big adjustment, certainly. But I felt really strongly when I was making the decision to leave the ashram, which was in large part because my body and my mind were at a point where I wasn't able to stay anymore. But when I was making this decision, I felt really strongly that I wanted to be sure I wasn't choosing to leave because I was running from something. I didn't want to be running from even the fear of death, even the fear of, my body can't exist in this environment, and it might ultimately lead to serious illness or death. I didn't want to be running from that fear. I wanted to be sure that I was making the decision out of a desire to move towards a deeper connection with Krishna, ultimately, in order to build my spiritual life. And I felt really strongly that actually at the end of the day, what I needed to learn was that bhakti isn't dependent on a place, even a very spiritual place. Like Odarya and Madhavan ashrams are, they are this, in a sense, the spiritual world in this world, and very special places to live. But I knew that for my own spiritual journey, I had said I had wanted to be a nun from the time I was little. Well, in a sense, although that's a spiritual goal, it's in a sense an anartha in that I was thinking about that as my spiritual life, in a way. And so I knew that I also needed to get away from that perception, that I needed to cultivate that ashram in myself, and that living at the ashram in some way was kind of giving me a pass to say, well, I live in this environment, I do these practices, kind of depend on that environment, for that sense of shelter. And that's okay too. I mean, that's, I grew a lot in that environment, and I did need that environment to some extent for that period. But I felt very strongly that I needed to grow beyond that in a way for me. Now, I think, of course, you could go back to an environment like that and experience it in a whole nother way. So this isn't to say, everyone living in that environment is having the same, um, difficulty or whatever. But for myself, I felt really called very strongly to cultivate that ashram in myself, and to be able to see that that bhakti isn't dependent on my body, it's not dependent on my mind, it's not dependent on my my circumstance, it's not dependent on where I live, whether I'm a ashram devotee, a monastic, or a householder, that bhakti is independent of all of that, and that what it's dependent on is my will, and that I have to make the choice to practice bhakti. And living as a householder, actually, no one else no one else is making a schedule of deity worship. No one else is gonna tell me I need to chant my rounds, or whatever it is. I have to, that has to come from within me. And I see that as kind of the big lesson of the current period of my life I'm in, and I'm still learning it, and I'm still I'm still learning how to navigate that. But I think that that's what I'm intended to learn now, and to hopefully come away from the experience as a householder with. So I see, my job, the house that I live in, I mean, they're necessities for maintaining my body, and ultimately they do belong to Krishna. But in some sense, I also see them as obstacles in a way that I have to I have to practice, even if I have to work, even if I have to clean my house, or whatever it is, whatever kind of maintenance things that need to be done, that I still have to will myself to practice. And every time I do that, every time I express my will in relation to bhakti, I'm strengthened as a devotee. So I get to do that a lot as a householder. And that's good, and at the end of the day, that's going to be really good for me. So
it's really, it's really beautiful. And even in Joseph Campbell's kind of different stages, and the last stage is kind of returning back to back to your life that you left, but you are a changed person, and so you're living the life very differently than you would have lived it had you not had all the ashram experience. And you have a lot to offer, and most devotees are going to be in a household or ashram, and so giving each other the support is so really, especially with our sanga where we're all over the world and we don't really have like we just had the Bulgarian retreats and the Finland retreat, and that was wonderful, but we don't have like central meeting places for everybody. And so like these online kind of sangas and encouraging one another, it's so important. So I thank you so. Sure. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. You have to leave right now. Yeah, we're just, no, we were just finishing this, and then we're going to open up for questions. So yeah, thank you for keeping us on track here. So just want to ask, so thank you so much. Ananda Mayi, it was very inspiring for me to hear you put your story together and share it the way you did. And I'm sure all the devotees who have listened to this are feeling the same way. But that's an assumption. I shouldn't make assumptions. So does anybody have a question? Sakirati wrote that this is interview number 14. Thank you for doing that for us. So anybody have a question that you'd like to ask? Maybe not. So, and if not, then we'll get to leave on time and Akura won't be in anxiety. Thank you. And for the devotees who are on Facebook, you wouldn't have heard what Akura just said, but he was just appreciating the depth of this interview and how he feels he can feel the presence of Tripurari Maharaj in his beautiful disciple. So anything else? Last minute, one more maybe, if anybody has anything, take one question. It's perfect. Okay. So then we can wrap up, and let's see, who is up next week? Oh, there is. Okay.
It's a fascinating question.
So just why don't you repeat the question so that
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So she's asking what ways in which Krishna manifests in my writing practice. I'm a poet. As I mentioned earlier, I started writing poetry really young as a child. And then I also studied poetry in the university, and now I teach poetry for a living. One of the ways in which Krishna has shown up in my writing, I was thinking back to when I was a child again, and I I realized as a child writing these kind of spiritual poems that that every word um, was kind of a glorification of some aspect of God. At that point in my life, I wasn't connected with Krishna in this life, so I was thinking, about God, as just more general in that way. But I started to see the world that way. So it through writing, I kind of, realized this that everything in a sense was kind of worshiping. Everything in the world is kind of pointing to some aspect of Krishna that's worshipable. And I started to see language in that way, but I also started to see the world in that way. So I kind of started to look at everything as just in and of itself inherently glorifying Krishna. And yeah, I mean, it's I guess a little bit hard to explain, but I think that has had really profound impact on how I use language in poetry. Poets use language not necessarily in the same way that we use language in our daily speech. We use language kind of in the way that a potter uses clay, to really form something new. We kind of really get our hands into it and make something out of it. And so to kind of see inside language in that way, when I write, I'm really trying to evoke something beyond just the literal meaning on the page, and using language as an art medium in a way to do that. I don't know if that makes sense, but also in a simpler way. Writing has also helped to lead me to realizations. I think there's prayerful reading and prayerful writing where we we read and we meditate. It's a conversation with Krishna. And I like to write in the same way. So to kind of write and and meditate in conversation, so that I don't necessarily know what's going to come out of what I'm writing at the end. It's a journey in and of itself, the writing that you're kind of led to the realization that might come at the end of it through the process of writing. So the writing can be kind of a vehicle towards those kinds of realizations.
So, so thank you very much. Is there any place that we could direct the devotees to go to see some of your poetry?
Yeah, I have not published much, in part because it's a very sacred act for me. So it's been conflicting to me, to say the least, to publish. But I have published some of my prose writing on Ruminate magazine. And I've published under Ananda mayi. So you can find some of my writing there. It's kind of poetic prose, and a lot of it is actually about bhakti as well. So
that would be ruminatemagazine.com that they could.
yeah, and it's under RUMINATE, ruminate, just like cow. Okay. INATE. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And my writing is on their online space. It's called The Waking, but you'll find just their online. Yeah. Yeah, I can do that. Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Somebody put it in there. Oh, you did. I think. Oh. Oh yeah, you got it. You got it.
Okay.
Awaking. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Anakura. Again, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your translation service. It's invaluable to, especially all the Spanish speaking devotees that are coming on. So thank you so much. And Ananda Mayi, thank you again. And
Thank
all
you.
the beautiful devotees who joined us. And so next week will be Amala Sham Das, and that he's a devotee from also from North Carolina recently in the last few years. He's been all over. So I look forward to, we'll hear his interview next week, and everybody have a great week, and we'll see everybody soon. Bye.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Jai Hare
Bol,
Bol.
pronounce everyone.